Hello everyone and welcome back to another video. Today we are going to be discussing what I've been up to for the last couple months. So in short, to keep a long story very short, I purchased a home, and it turns out buying your own home by yourself takes a lot of time, energy, effort, and yes, money. So the easiest thing to cut from my plate was filming videos for my YouTube channel, because that neither pays me nor and requires a lot of time, I should say. And the second easiest thing to cut is pleasure reading, because I'm no longer in school. I don't have to read any of these books that I check out of the library, but I just want to. So for the last couple months, I have been doing very, very little reading and absolutely no filming. However, I'm resolving to myself to get back into my routine this summer because I've absolutely missed talking about books and reading about books. Nothing is better than spending a hot summer night, eating some ice cream in front of a fan, or reading a good book. That is like my dream evening. So we're going to get back into the swing of things. I have moved my physical stuff into my house, and well, a house is a never-ending to-do list, I'm discovering. There is still plenty of time for me to get back into reading now that I've kind of settled some of the crazier first couple weeks out. So with that being said, I want to take this opportunity to get back in the swing of things and talk about the few things that I did read in the couple months that I have been gone. So like I mentioned, I have done almost no reading in this time, but the little reading that I have been doing has been very, very good, very high quality. I find myself being very picky when I had no time. And I actually been able to get started on a personal project that I've been wanting to accomplish. So despite the small number of books, I feel like I have had some wins and some things that I really, really appreciated, and books that I can personally recommend, or specifically recommend to anyone looking for their next read. So the first book is a book that I rated 4.5 stars, and I'm not really sure if outside the context in which I read it in, I would have given it 4.5 stars, but I'm going to explain the book, and then I'm going to explain the context in which I rated it. So it was The House Witch. This is a fantasy series that I believe was self-published, and I read the first book in the series. This was a cozy fantasy about a house witch whose power is localized in the kitchen, and he moves into a castle, and it's kind of just his cozy day-to-day life, and there's some adventures and things that occur in the book. I read this book for book club, so I was able to compare my opinion of this book with other people's opinion, and other people found the book maybe moderately entertaining, but they didn't find it the 4.5 rating that I gave it. I genuinely think that sometimes the rating you give a book correlates to things that you've been reading lately, the mood you're in, or just the format that you consume it in. So I think there's a wide variety of things outside the actual content of the book that can influence your rating. And for me, I think it was the fact that I wanted to like cozy fantasy, and I had had a very negative experience shortly before reading this book with a cozy fantasy book that I tried to get into. So cozy fantasy is this kind of new niche in, I don't want to say new because I'm sure people have been writing about this since the 80s, but it feels new. It feels like it kind of popped off maybe like last year, 2 years ago. And I wanted to like it because it seems right up my alley. And so I went for probably one of the bigger titles in the genre, and I really hope that this was a book in the genre and I'm not just miscorrelating things here. And it was You Can't Spell Treason Without Tea. This was a book that people had seemed to rate pretty highly and seemed to enjoy just from an outside perspective. So I picked it up and decided to read it. I don't think I got 10 pages in. I disliked it that much, and that's very surprising for me that I put it down so fast. And I was disappointed because I like the concept of cozy fantasy seemed so positive to me. So the fact that I didn't like one of the bigger titles made me really disappointed. And then shortly afterwards, we read The House Witch. We, being the book club, read The House Witch, and I really enjoyed it. And I think it was just the contrast of having read something that I had such a poor perspective, or such a poor I had such a negative experience with that first book, putting it down so quickly, that by the time I got to The House Witch, I was kind of primed to think anything that was like average quality was probably going to be higher than it was. I was going to rate it or perceive it as better than it was. There were some laugh out loud moments, there were some enjoyable adventures, and I don't think anyone in the book club hated the book, if I remember correctly, but I think I did agree with a lot of the criticism that my book club did bring up. So I think I know that I gave it kind of a biased rating, and that rating kind of skewed high, but I think if you are looking to get into cozy fantasy, it might be an interesting place to start. I think what it really needed was another round of editing. I believe it is self-published. It kind of read like fan fiction. It's almost what it felt like, which is not bad. It definitely was good enough to be published. I just think that, and you can tell the author is talented, does have a talent for this. I just think it needed maybe a professional edit, and maybe could have cut like 100 pages out of the book because it is quite a long book, but I think it has a really solid concept, and it does deserve a high rating, even if I know the rating I gave it was a little skewed high. The next 2 books I read were in audiobook format when I was doing some hiking, driving around the country doing hiking, one of my favorite activities. And the first one was Bandit Heaven, and this was about the Wild West. I think it was a Hole in the Wall gang. This book was a 5-star read. This was an absolute 5-star read. This one was by Tom Clavin, I think it was. And this book was about these outlaws, these gangs, these characters who were in the Wild West in this time when the West was still this open area. We say open, there were clearly people living there, but that's a whole separate side of American history. But yes, these gangs that would blow up railroad bridges and hold up trains and hold up banks. The whole book from beginning to end was an absolute wild ride, a wild adventure. I was pausing the audiobook in the car to just speak my thoughts out loud. It was crazy. It was so fun. At one point I was like, wow, it was really wild out there. And then I was like, duh, the Wild West. That's why they... So I'm a little slow is basically what I'm saying. So after finishing Bandit Heaven, which I had a fantastic time listening to, give it a listen if you have any interest in American history, or you just want to hear about gangs blowing up railroad bridges to hold up railroads and trains, absolutely give Bandit Heaven a read. After finishing that one, I read The Summer of 1876, which I gave a 4.5 star. It was actually done by the same audiobook narrator as Bandit Heaven, and I didn't realize that when I got that audiobook out, but that was another fascinating book. And I think that book was really the one that changed my opinion on this period of history, of American history, that runs from the Civil War to about World War I. That was kind of the part of American history in school where I kind of zoned out, and it was like, well, this part isn't really particularly interesting to me, even though I do enjoy history. And I think that book, which talks about some of the key pivotal events that take place in the year 1876, which would be the centennial from 1776. And I think that one kind of also, in conjunction with Bandit Heaven, kind of explains some of the interesting things that are going on in American history at this time. So those 2 audiobooks together were my road trip audiobooks, which was right before I purchased a home, but I didn't have time to film or write reviews on those books when I came back because I was busy. But those were absolutely top tier books to read or listen to. I listened to them in audiobook form. Another one I listened to on my road trip was Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking by Susan Cain. I found this book very fascinating, mostly because I am an extrovert. I am not an introvert, so throughout the book I was like, wow, I don't relate to this at all. But it's very interesting to see how people with a very different personality type from you do interact. And it's just very intriguing to hear about and listen to. And I think that the world does kind of underestimate introverts. I think there's maybe a slight bias towards extroversion. I definitely think that is true. I think just being social and open are maybe more prized traits in the world. And I think that introverts can have a lot of power in their own unique skills that us extroverts do not possess. So it was very, very fascinating, even though at many points I was like, I don't relate to this at all. This is 0% relatable to me, but it's relatable to a large portion of the population. And whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, however you class yourself, I think Quiet was a fascinating book to read. Finally, I've been working on some goals, and that is one of my goals this year to read more poetry, or rather to find poetry that I enjoy. I enjoy some of the older poetry, like the stuff that would be in your English textbook in school or your literature textbook in school, but I have found that anything that was written in modern times, I either can't figure out what I like, and it just feels like an overwhelming choice when I go to that section of my public library. There's too many options. I don't know what I'm looking for. I don't know what to do. So this year I'm like, I want to find some poetry collections that I enjoy, or maybe some authors that I do enjoy. There have been a couple here and there throughout the years, but I really this year want to hone in on what in particular I enjoy. Something else I find is that when I read a poetry collection, I'm unable to tell why I did or didn't like something, which is a skill I want to work on. Unlike a fantasy novel or a nonfiction book where I can usually pinpoint the reason I did or didn't like a book, or a reason I did or didn't like a certain section, I feel like I have none of those skills when it comes to poetry. I'm just like, didn't like it, didn't resonate with me. So I did read 3 different poetry collections. One was more nature and art focused, and that one was all right, but I think it was mostly all right because I liked the art in the book. So that was ho-hum. The other 2 I do have out. I read The Flower of Youth. Didn't like this one, give it 0 out of 5 stars. I felt like the whole book was kind of just reviewing someone who engaged in potential illegal activities with underage boys. We'll just say that. 0 out of 10. Didn't like that one. I know why I didn't like that one. So The Flower of Youth was not one I recommended, and I knew why I didn't like it, but I knew I didn't like that for the content, so we can toss that one. The next one was a History of Kindness by Linda Hogan, and this is written from a Native American perspective. But again, it was fine. It was all right. There was a couple that I liked. On page 73, Remember, that one, and on page 81, Some New Marvel. But again, I can't tell you why in particular this one was just all right and not award winning or like wonderful in my book, because the poet is a Pulitzer Prize finalist. But again, I just feel like I lack the skills to explain why I do or don't like a collection of poetry. So that's something I'm going to work on, and I am working on it. I find that poetry collections are nice when I'm in this maybe busier season of life, because there's very small, discrete sections. I can just read a couple and take a little break, maybe enjoy a cup of coffee without feeling like I'm committing to a whole chapter, which might be a lot to read at this time. So I do want to work on this, and I want to maybe get better. I'm probably not going to review every collection of poetry I read just because I don't have the skills to talk about what I'm reading, but that is something I have been doing and something that I do want to continue to accomplish in my reading goals this year. So anyways, thank you so much for your continued support. I continue to get comments even without posting, so I'm so glad that people are still enjoying my content and engaging with it. And this summer, I'm going to get back on the train. I'm going to get back into filming, and I hope to read a lot of great books this summer and continue to talk to you guys and film book reviews about books that I love and enjoy. Thank you very much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.